attachment theory is a fascinating theory of how infants, little children, bond with their parents, and that bond lays the path for how they bond and interact with people in their future. If they have a good form of attachment to a caregiver, then there's very likely that as they turn into adults, they will have good relationships or be able to sustain relationships with others. I'm reminded of a quote by Søren Kierkegaard: life has to be led forward, but viewed backwards. What he meant by that was our life today is foundationed by our past experience and certainly our relationships with others. And that is why attachment theory and understanding attachment theory is so important.
Thank you, Rory. Attachment theory lies in our development as human beings. And you mentioned secure attachment. That is a person that is maybe quite balanced. Within secure attachment, the person might be okay with themselves, or comments and feedback from others wouldn't trigger them. How does that attachment form in those early years?
And there's a number of theories that have been put forward. But before I go there, I just want to say a good way of thinking about attachment, certainly if you're an adult, is I'm okay, you're okay. Borrowing that from transactional analysis, it literally is that. You're right in yourself, you feel secure in yourself, and when you're with others, you feel secure with them. I'm okay, you're okay. And what can happen is that people who have faulty attachments either don't feel okay in relationships or they feel not okay with others. I think that would be a very simplified way of using TA theory to explain what attachment is in adult life. It started with John Bowlby. Bowlby was a psychiatrist who had a poor upbringing. He was sent to a boarding school in the 1940s. As a consequence, it set him on a path of trying to understand what happens when children are separated from their mother. Bowlby's view of attachment was biological. And in fact, he argued that attachment theory was intrinsic in increasing chances of survival. And Bowlby, indeed, after the Second World War, did a piece of research on refugees and for the World Health Organization at the time. He came to the conclusion that children who didn't have an attachment could find themselves in some difficulty. So that's the basis of it, Ken.
Thank you. And I like how you referred to I'm okay, you're okay. And then, of course, we have I'm okay, you're not okay. These are the TA terms that are used, meaning I can't trust anybody. If you want a job doing, you've got to do it yourself. I'm really suspicious about people because I'm okay, you're not okay. And then, of course, the other side of that is you're okay, I'm not okay. I don't feel okay with myself. I don't feel confident in the choices, the decisions I make, what I say. I look to others for validation. So if I have an opinion or a thought on something and you say, no, that's wrong, it's actually like this. Am I understanding that correctly, Rory?
Yeah, pretty much. There was a theorist called Mary Ainsworth who is often cited as giving us three views of attachment. Ainsworth was herself a very accomplished child psychologist. She did a number of experiments called Strange Situation. Basically, a mother would accompany a child into a room with toys, and then the mother would leave, the child would be on their own, and a stranger would go into the room. The researchers would observe how the child reacted to the stranger, and when the mother came back, observe the behavior of the child towards the mother. And she split attachment into three ideas: secure attachment, which would be the I'm okay, you're okay, and the child feels confident that the caregivers, the mother was okay, not too distressed, maybe a little bit puzzled about the whole thing. And then you have avoidant attachment: I'm okay, you're not okay, if we use those TA terms, and they would avoid perhaps the mother and would show very little distress during the separation, would be distant from the mother. And then you have something called ambivalence or resistant attachment, which is you're okay, I'm not okay. And the child would be maybe clingy, difficult, feel very distressed during the separation. And that became the predominant idea, certainly in social work, through the 70s and into the 80s, about attachment.
Thank you. And I guess what I'm looking for now is, how does this apply to therapy? One of the exercises that we did when we were teaching together, Rory, is we would encourage our students to identify and understand their own attachment style. But how does it translate into therapy when a client has a certain attachment style? What might we see? What are the clues we're looking out for, Rory?
That's a very good question, Ken. First of all is the therapist and the client's relationship, and what's from the past may be played out in the relationship. If I'm working with clients and they may get very distressed at the idea of leaving, or at the idea that therapy may come to an end, that could be ambivalent attachment played out. The person may be reluctant to leave what they perceive as a caregiver. It may be that you have on the opposite side someone who's avoidant. Maybe they're not connecting, and through the arc of the relationship you have with the client, they may very well not make a connection with you. There can be lots of reasons for that. And secondly, relationships with others. A lot of therapy, in my experience, focuses on the experiences that the client has with other people, and in relationships especially. Sometimes you may get nuggets of information that the client reveals in therapy. It might be a client saying, I'm having relationship troubles with men. It might be that the father wasn't very present. I really have a difficulty with intimacy with women. And that could be a sign of difficulty in the past. They may say, my mother was very cold to me. She didn't have much time for me. Now I feel that in relationships, I just don't feel the person is connecting enough to me. That speaks to attachment. So there's quite a few things there to consider, Ken.
With secure attachment, the client is able to describe their experience and their feeling fully and in a balanced way. So they have access to their feelings. They're not holding anything back. Avoidant attachment, in which the client is unable to elaborate on anything, providing only minimal answers. They're holding something back, or they don't feel that they're able to share that. Sticking to the facts rather than their feelings. I think this all boils down to trust. I'm holding a little bit back because I don't fully trust. And then with the anxious attachment, the client talks quickly, and it's really difficult for you, the therapist, to follow and to make space for any intervention. I can certainly relate to seeing all of those types of presentations, and it doesn't mean they necessarily fall in under this theory, but understanding the theories at least gives us more of an understanding of where that client might be coming from. So if we suspect that a client might be acting from a certain attachment style, is there anything we can or should be doing as a counsellor, or is it just a matter of noting that?
It depends on the situation, Ken. Personally, I wouldn't jump in immediately. I would look for a pattern of behaviour in a client. If that came up, I might reflect that back. I might say, it's a bit of a struggle for you to connect with people emotionally. And you mentioned a difficulty with your mother or father in the past. Could there be a connection there? Try and help them join the dots. And I'd like to also say something about cultural competence here, because attachment theory is a very westernized, Eurocentric idea. And in African cultures, there's an idea of allo parenting, and that involves childcare responsibilities amongst multiple caregivers. So we have to be thoughtful that from some cultures, collective cultures, attachment theory may not be a really good fit. And I think all therapists need to be culturally competent and not overlay Western Eurocentric ideas on clients who are not from that sphere of the world.
Thank you, Rory. And one more area that I'd love to touch on. I'm not okay, but you're not okay. No, that is a person who doesn't trust themselves, doesn't trust those around them. What might we see in that kind of individual? How might they present or show themselves in the world? Because that's a horrible place to be, living in a world where you don't trust yourself and your own abilities, and you don't trust anyone else that gives you advice or guidance. It sounds very lost.
It's a terrible thing. It's someone who's terrified at the same time as being very lost and alone. And what you're alluding to is the work of Means and Solomon in the 80s, the last big piece of attachment ideas, and that is disorganised attachment, where a child may be in a situation with a parent where they're either having to be the parent even as a little child because the parent isn't capable, or they're in a very abusive situation. Horrified and terrified was the way it was described to me when I did my attachment training. This idea of not being able to trust self, mainly driven from the fact that they didn't have any agency when they were children to be able to make any changes because they're only little, and then horrified about what was happening around them. With people who have a disorganised attachment style, it can take a long time for them to integrate themselves. The part of them that trusts themselves isn't there. The part of them that puts their trust in other people is lost. For someone who explores that, it's about consistency of the therapist, being consistent in the relationship. There was a term coined called the good enough mother, and it's been changed to the good enough other. I think this is where psychotherapy excels, because what you're doing is reparenting.
Mm.
You can do it as a counsellor, but it's not going to be 5 sessions. This is a long-term engagement where the therapist becomes the secure object. And that work is done thoughtfully and boundaried, and the client realises this is going to be a long-time piece of work. From what I've read and discussed with colleagues, there isn't an absolute cure for this. It's something that may be managed, not cured.
Thank you. And that bit that you've just said there, there's no cure for this. As counsellors, psychotherapists, we can understand our own attachment style. We can work around our own attachment style. We can maybe change the behaviours that come up when we see that attachment style. But you mentioning there's no fix. It doesn't go away. And in times of extreme stress, when we lose the ability to think clearly, there is a reverting back to that original attachment style. I certainly see that within my own life. I have an anxious attachment style. So it's I'm okay, you're not okay is my attachment style. And I have to check that all the time. I see it come up often within my life. When I see it, I am able to modify my behaviors around it. But when I'm stressed, when I'm under pressure, I revert back to that attachment style. And that can be pretty tricky, can't it?
It can be. My own attachment styles are avoidant, dismissive. And you make a very good point about reverting back. Therapy will help you build new ways of thinking about yourself. Good therapy will allow somebody to be aware of why they're feeling how they are. And generally speaking, it's all good. But in extreme stressful situations, the new neural pathway you build through therapy to manage your attachment may not be available to you. So you go down the old neural pathway. In summary, as a therapist, the best you can hope for is that they have an awareness. There's no cure, but people can manage it. People can understand the process and manage it.
Thank you, Rory, and thank you for bringing this topic. This topic is so important. It shows itself so often, and I encourage you, identify your own attachment style. There's a lot of fun in that.